We're seeing a lot of nonsense, a lot of irresponsible behavior. People protesting in North Carolina as I record this for their right to infect each other and kill their grandparents. This time I'm sharing some knowledge gleaned from a white paper at Harvard University. The title of this paper is When Can We Go Out? Evaluating Policy Paradigms for Responding to the COVID-19 Threat. Two broad points in this paper: how we got into this mess as the US and the best way to get out. So let me start with how we got into this. The current president walked into the White House very arrogant, very ignorant, saw anything a previous president had done, like a pandemic preparedness playbook, and lit that joint on fire, deciding he would go with his gut.
I'll say this, I'm very, very satisfied with the decision we made, listening to experts, listening to my gut.
Over science, and a lot of us are paying the price, and some people, sadly, have perished unnecessarily because of the delay. Didn't have to be this way. Turns out other nations are like a parallel universe where we can see a different reality play out, and the authors focus on Taiwan, which has experience with SARS prior to this and has updated their society to be able to deal with it. There are thermal temperature scanners at malls and office places. When you board a public transit vehicle, you scan your cell phone with a QR code. That gives the government the ability to notify everybody on that train car if any one of them pops up as infected with something. We don't have that going on in the US, at least not yet, but we could. So that takes me to the meat of the paper. When can we go out? We're seeing a lot of nonsense, a lot of irresponsible behavior. People protesting in North Carolina as I record this for their right to infect each other and kill their grandparents. And you know, we are a free society. You're free to be a fool if you want, but it turns out there's a smarter way. This group lays out 3 ways that we might get out. The first, freeze in place. Freeze in place is really just about protecting the healthcare system, and it's what we've been focused on so much right now, flattening the curve, allowing those frontline health workers, those limited resources of equipment and ICU beds not to be overrun by a spike in cases. So the good news is it does reduce the ability of the virus to infect massive numbers of people. The bad news is it doesn't actually get us to the other side, and it freezes the economy in place. And for it to be effective, requires multiple rounds of this extreme distancing. They're saying 2 to 4 rounds of this, 2 months on, 1 month off, something like that, adding up to a year to a year and a half of this stasis, which is not good. $10 to $15 trillion later, we could be on the other side. But there's another way forward, the Mobilize and Transition plan. And this takes as the metaphor wartime. You see a threat to your healthcare system as an existential threat, as a national security threat. So you get on that war footing and you mobilize your entire society. You're still doing what freeze in place calls for, especially initially, an initial quarantine period to buy you time to make investments to fight the next round of the pandemic or future pandemics. This is where we finally get to Infrastructure Week. Ding, 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 we finally get to have Infrastructure Week. In this case, infrastructure means the ability to do wide-scale testing, the ability to have more localized treatment in terms of isolating people, and the ability to reactivate parts of our society with the knowledge of who's infected and who's not. Most interestingly, if we get to the point where we understand how immunity might work in this, then we can deploy those people with immunity on the front lines. The paper actually calls for a medical reserve corps, where those people are in charge of the contact tracing and the following up. The advantage of this Mobilize and Transition path is that we get the whole society engaged in being part of the solution to this problem. This is exciting because a lot of us are stuck at home, but if we were able to return to school, return to work, know that we're going to get our temperature checked every day, that we're going to get tested every week, we can be a part of that solution, and we can deploy the strongest of us to be out back in society as we still hunt for the vaccine, which is really the only way we fully return to normal. The last path, which is very much not recommended, is surrender. Now, surrender says let the virus run its course and have its way with your people. In the US, that looks like 2 million dead. And some folks arguing from a purely economic standpoint think that that's okay. But it turns out a bunch of dead bodies still cost a lot of real money. And we're talking $10 to $20 trillion for this path versus 10 to 15 trillion for freeze in place. But the reason you don't do the surrender thing isn't just because of math. You do it because of the whole purpose of government and having a society in the first place. Not just the morality, but the idea that the reason we have these United States and many countries exist in the first place is to provide for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's to have the common defense and look out for the general welfare. A country and a government which intentionally lets millions of its citizens die has lost its legitimacy. As the paper says, to do that is to forfeit the very reason you have a state in the first place. So that's not good economically, it's not good morally, but it would delegitimize our entire political system. Now, maybe there's some psychos like Steve Bannon who were down with that sort of deconstruction of the administrative state, but your boy's not one of them. I like an administrative state. I like my fellow country people alive and well. And we're all connected anyway, so letting 2 million people die is going to affect all of us. Mobilize and Transition. That's the path. You can find more of this paper at ethics.harvard.edu. I don't work for them. I was just really thrilled to read this document, and I've been trying to share the insights where I can. So right now, that means with you.